Hey, how's it going? Bill Lethman here for Money Evolution. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what you can expect when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act rate expire. So as you may have heard me talk about previously on the channel here, or maybe you heard it from somewhere else, the current tax code that we have right now, known as the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, those rates went into effect in 2018, but they had a sunset provision, which means that only through 2025 will we have that new tax code, and then beginning in 2026, we're going to revert back to the old tax code with a whole new set of tax tables and new rules back to what it was prior to that passing in 2018. But real quick though, before I get into the content of today's video, if you're watching this, you'd like to learn more about understanding your taxes, maybe planning for retirement, some of the strategies we talk about here on the channel, be sure to like and subscribe our channel. We're always putting out new videos that I think are intended to be very educational for our viewers. Also, I'm getting ready to do my next live stream presentation. That's going to be coming up on October 17th. Depending on when you're watching this video, that's October 17th of 2024. We'll have some links down in the description below for the registration, and it's going to be a very deep dive on taxes and understanding all the different tax rules and how your taxes are calculated and some strategies that we work with our clients on a regular basis. So really excited about that. And if you're watching this after October 17th of 2024, we'll have some links down in the description probably to one of our replays. So let's jump into the video. Probably the biggest change that occurred as a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passing are the tax tables themselves. So up here on the screen, I have the current tax table for married filing joint. If you're a single tax filer or head of household, you're going to find a very similar experience to this. But under the new tax table, we have a little bit different shift in the rates themselves. We have a 0% and a 10%, just like we did prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And by the way, this chart on the right side of this is going to be what that old tax table is, and I actually did make some adjustments for inflation so we can start to get an idea based on 2024 numbers how that old tax table may look and how it may compare to what we have today. Then we have a 12% tax bracket, and that basically replaced the 15% tax bracket, and basically the rough same levels of income there with the 12 and the 15. Then we had a 22% compared to a 25%. Again, fairly similar levels of income there. And then where we really, I think, got the biggest gift with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, something I've talked about in other videos, is that 24% tax bracket. So if you look at it for married filing joint, that 24% tax bracket goes all the way up to $383,900. Inflation adjusted, the 28% tax bracket only went to $276,000, which means that today's 24% tax bracket actually goes about $100,000 into that 33% tax bracket. So that is really a gift. And if you're filing a single tax return or head of household, I think you're going to find something fairly similar. So, the number one biggest change that we can expect to see in 2026 if these Tax Cuts and Jobs Act rates are allowed to expire, they don't extend them, Congress doesn't enact any new tax legislation, is a higher tax table basically across the board. And I'll just put that down, higher tax table. So as I've talked about before in other videos, it's not just the rate of taxes that you're paying or whatever that table rate tax is, but it's also how much of your income is subject to tax. And the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act actually brought in a couple of very significant changes to how much of your income is subject to tax. Probably number one on the list was actually the increase to the standard deduction, which basically with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was about doubled from what it was before. So today in 2024, if you're married filing a joint tax return, your standard deduction is about $29,200. If you're single, it's about half of that. But prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act coming in, the married filing joint was about half of that amount, so a little less than about $14,000 per year. The other option for this is instead of taking the standard deduction, you could itemize your deductions. And so one of the things with that doubling of the standard deduction actually had a lot more people filing their taxes using the standard deduction, really simplifying the tax process for a lot of people. I forget the number exactly, but drastically decreased the number of people that were itemizing their deductions. But the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did make a couple very significant changes to the itemized deductions as well, basically limiting some of the deductions that we were previously able to take. One of those was on something called state and local taxes. Sometimes we abbreviate that using the acronym SALT. So that's going to be state and local taxes like your property taxes, or if you're in a state that has an income tax and you're paying that, you're allowed to deduct that off of your federal tax return. Under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, you still are allowed to do that. However, it's going to be limited to just $10,000 per year. So if you think about it, if you've got a house and you're paying property taxes, you might be thinking maybe your property taxes alone are either very close to that $10,000 or maybe even over that $10,000 limit, and you haven't even added in your state income taxes yet. So that was a pretty significant rule change there for being able to deduct some of that. The other thing that changed too is mortgage interest. So previously to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, you were able to deduct mortgage interest on a primary house or even a second house up to $1 million of indebtedness. Well, under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that's going to be limited now to just $750,000. So that's something that's going to affect, and same thing with SALT. It's going to affect people that are at the upper levels of income much more than people maybe at the lower levels of income there. So that mortgage interest is going to be dropped down by about 25%. The other thing that you may know about itemized deductions, especially if you're one of the high tax earners, there was some phase outs of your itemized deductions. So when you reach certain thresholds, they started to basically limit the amount that you were able to take for those itemized deductions. So back in 2017, if you were single, filing a single tax return, about $261,000 of income was the amount. If you were over that, they started to take away some of your itemized deductions. If you're married filing joint, that number was about $313,000. So what we can expect when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires, we don't know these numbers exactly, but we've applied some inflation factors to this so we can get a little bit of a sense of what that might look like. And we're looking at basically about $309 for single and $371 for married filing joint. And so just a little bit on that. So if you're in those upper income brackets, unfortunately, we've got to look forward to having some of those itemized deductions phased out there a little bit. The third thing, or fourth thing here, was personal exemptions. And personal exemptions, you get to claim one for every person in your household that's a dependent. You, your spouse, if you have kids that are still at home and dependent on you. Well, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that was completely eliminated. So essentially, if you were a married couple with the doubling of the standard deduction, that was probably about a wash. The other thing we're going to talk about here in just a second is the child tax credit. And so I think with the child tax credit, even if you were a family of 4 or 5, I think you still came out a little bit ahead with the elimination of those personal exemptions there. And but those were eliminated with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So let's go to that number 5, and this is, I think, really exciting here for people that have kids, kids that are home that are dependent, basically kids that are under 17. The child tax credit was dramatically expanded from what it was back in 2017. So the old tax credit was $1,000, and the new tax credit was $2,000. And I'll take just a second here to make sure that everyone understands the difference between a tax credit and a tax deduction. So when we're talking about tax deductions like itemized deductions or standard deductions, things like that, it's actually reducing the amount of your income that's subject to tax. But a tax credit is actually coming right off of the tax bill itself. So if you owe $2,000 in taxes and you have a $1,000 tax credit, it's actually eliminating the amount of tax you owe. So that's much more valuable to have a tax credit as opposed to a tax deduction. So the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act essentially doubled that tax credit from $1,000 to $2,000. But here's what I think is really exciting with the new Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is it expanded the number of people that were eligible. So prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, if you were single, you had to make less than 75, single or any other head of household, anything other than married filing joint, you had to make less than $75,000 a year to qualify for one of these child tax credits. And if you were married filing a joint tax return, you had to make less than $110,000. Well, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that was expanded to $200,000 and $400,000. So now, obviously, that's reaching a whole lot more people, a lot more of that middle class household where they have kids. They're now going to be eligible for that with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So unfortunately, if those Tax Cuts and Jobs Act rates are let to expire, this is probably one of the more significant changes that people can unfortunately not look forward to, but kind of expect is going to happen when those tax cuts expire in a couple of years. So fortunately, I think there is some talk among politicians about keeping the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in place. I know we're in the middle of another election season here, so you see things all over the place on both sides. And some people would lead you to believe that these Tax Cuts and Jobs Act really only helped the super wealthy. But really, they did help the super wealthy, but they helped everybody. And in fact, in terms of percentage help, it actually helped people that are in the middle class and the lower middle class and even lower class a lot more than they did help people at the top end. In fact, I just made a video a couple of days ago where I actually break it down. I look at somebody making in the median household income and then somebody making $3.3 million. And they both save taxes under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But I believe the number, I don't have it off the top of my head, was about 56% tax savings for the person that was making, I think it was about $80,000 a year for their household versus only about 7% tax savings for somebody at the higher end. So pretty significant, and basically for somebody in that median household income, essentially cut their tax bill in half, actually a little bit more than cut it in half. So anyway, I'll put a link down in the description for that video as well, because I think that's a really good one that kind of breaks this all down. But that's it. That's basically what you could expect when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires. Unfortunately, pretty much no matter what your tax filing status is, I think you're going to expect higher taxes, at any level. So hopefully we get that extension. Be sure to check out some of the links in the description. If you'd like to learn more about what we do at Money Evolution, head over to moneyevolution.com. We are building out a whole entire financial resource center where you can learn about all kinds of different financial topics. We're doing our live stream presentations, trying to do those on about a monthly basis on different topics. Like I said, we've got the tax one coming up here this month. Last month we did one on annuities. We've done one on Social Security and Medicare. We'll be kind of going through and recycling some of these and doing them going forward. And you can also learn about our retirement time machine program and also our financial plan, the Money Evolution plan. Lots there, sorry for all that. But yeah, go ahead and check out those links in the description, and I'll see you back in one of our next videos. Thanks.